Thank you for joining us live here on ABN on a new episode of Debate Night. We are live in the studio, and my name is Summer Goriel. I will be your moderator of the evening. We have an exciting program for you this evening with two dynamic speakers I'd like to introduce to you. First of all, joining me in the studio, we have Robert Spencer. Thank you, sir, for joining me on the show tonight. Robert is the director of Jihad Watch, a program of the David Horowitz Freedom Center, and the author of 12 books, including two New York Times bestsellers, The Truth About Muhammad and The Politically Incorrect Guide to Islam and the Crusades. His latest book is Did Muhammad Exist? An Inquiry into Islam's Obscure Origins. Spencer has led seminars on Islam and Jihad for the United States Central Command, United States Army Command, and General Staff College, the U.S. Army's Asymmetric Warfare Group, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and the U.S. intelligence community. Also joining me this evening is Mubin Sheikh. Thank you, sir, for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me.
And Mubin is a former radical Muslim who turned away from his views after the 9/11 attacks, and soon thereafter he went to undertake additional studies in Arabic and Islamic studies in Syria. Upon his return in 2004, he became an undercover operator for domestic security intelligence in Canada and was the primary fact witness in the public prosecution of 11 aspiring terrorists. Since his work, he's obtained a master's degree in intelligence and counterterrorism and is now undertaking his PhD in psychology at the University of Liverpool. He currently teaches as a professor of public safety and police studies in Toronto, Canada. Thank you to you both for joining me on the program. Tonight's topic is a heated topic, and so we'll get right into it. The topic is the Qur'an teaches warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers. Again, the Qur'an teaches warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers. Of course, Robert will be arguing in the affirmative, and Mubin will be arguing in the negative. And just real quick, the structure of the show, we will have an opening statement from both speakers, two rebuttals, a crossfire, and then closing statements. And then at that time, we will open up the phone lines for the audience to call in and ask your questions and just provide us your comments on tonight's debate. And of course, as always, the studio line is open here at ABN, which is 248-416-1300, 248-416-1300. At this time, I will provide the first opening statement to Mubin. You have 7 minutes, Mubin, to provide the audience your opening statement, and you can start whenever you're ready.
Okay, I'm ready now. I've started my own stopwatch, so thank you very much for having me. First of all, I begin in the name of the one God of Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, Muhammad, peace be upon all the prophets, known and unknown. Secondly, thanks for the introduction for Robert as well. One of my aims has been to dismantle some of the false intelligence, bad intel that Robert's been giving the intelligence community in the U.S. I am, in fact, on my way to see one in next month. The FBI, Counterterrorism Division, etc. Basically, what's happened is this kind of narrative that Robert Spencer has been promoting has become very destructive and harmful for counterterrorism purposes. It is depicting an entire community as suspect and hostile. And it's easy to say that, well, most Muslims don't do this, but Islam teaches this. And the implication is that, well, most of us are not right Muslims. We should be blowing ourselves up. But let me just make it very easy, I think, for all of us in that Robert's argument will fall apart very easily as soon as a person can show even one verse in which the non-believers are not supposed to be attacked or harmed. If it's all about war and subjugation, my first question would be, please write this down, I'm expecting an answer. How is it even possible that the Qur'an talks about peace treaties if it's all about war and subjugation? Point number 2, you know, Robert really likes to quote chapter 9, verse 29, fight those who do not believe in Allah in the last day, and so on. And one of the things that Robert does a lot of the times is he takes verses out of their context. And I was amused to read some of the comments, Robert, on Jihad Watch. One of them was, the Muslim guy doing public safety, isn't that like the fox guarding the hen house? And I mean, what can I say? I love chicken. Um, but to associate being Muslim and there being some problem between the two, I really need to speak out against that. So if you look at chapter 9, and you can go right to the early verses. So chapter 9, verse 4, verse 6, 7, and 10, they will all talk about pagans who are violating their treaties. This is not about just fight everyone, no qualifiers, but it's referring to pagans who broke their treaties with the Muslims, because then you will see in verse 4, those pagans with whom you have entered into an alliance, and, important point, who have not subsequently failed you nor aided anyone against you, fulfill your engagements with them. So you see, it's not possible for Islam, for the Quran to teach wholesale fighting against anyone who's not Muslim just because they're not Muslim. To quote that verse, Robert, as Robert does, 929, over and over, as if by sheer repetition it becomes fact, you really have to look at the verses that come before it. This is what being in context means. So, as I just did, I showed you verse 4. You can read verse 5, verse 6. All of it is look at verse 6. If one amongst the pagans asks you for asylum, grant it to him, so that he may hear the word of Allah, and then escort him to where he can be secure. That is because they are men without knowledge. So it's showing you again that there's no instruction to just wholesale go out and just start killing people. I'll give you another verse from the Quran. Um, Do not let your hatred of a people cause you to be unjust to them. Rather, you must be just to everyone. This is why Allah said, "Be just; that is closer to piety." On that verse, do not let enmity between you and others cause you to be unjust in your dealings and rulings with them, such that you oppress them due to the enmity that is between you. So it's telling you you should not be doing this. And one of my favorite ones, Al-Qurtubi, he's a scholar who from the 12th century. He's giving an exegesis statement on this verse. And again, you're going to find, I know Robert does this. He'll quote some scholars from here, some scholars from there, and this is good. The problem is when you find other scholars saying other things. It's one thing to make the argument that Islam or the Quran teaches war and subjugation of non-believers, and there are no verses that speak of, qualifying statements or peace treaties or anything like that. So Al-Qurtubi, in regarding that verse, he says, this verse also proves that the disbelief of non-Muslims must not prevent us from being just to them, and it is not permissible for us to retaliate in the same manner, even if they kill our women and children and cause sorrow to befall us. It is not permissible for us to act likewise with the intention of making them feel grief and sorrow. So you see, and I'm on 5 minutes running up to 30 seconds. I've already shown you from chapter 9 itself. I haven't even gone into the other chapters because, I find it very strange that Robert maintains this argument when there are so many verses in the Quran which enjoin one towards peace, good conduct, righteousness. In fact, what is most ironic from this is Robert's argument that the Quran teaches war and subjugation of non Muslims because they're non Muslims is pretty much the same argument that Al Qaeda makes and other Islamically motivated terrorists. So and it's interesting because I actually used to subscribe to a lot of these views. So when Robert keeps perpetuating these ideas, I'm kind of reminded of myself when I was a little bit younger and didn't really look at the verses in their context, especially the verses that directly precede the verses that you're quoting. Um, Secondly, and I'm sure we'll get back to this. I'm running on 6.5 now. The history itself shows that Muslims did not just go around killing everyone wholesale. I'm going to quote to you the example of Umar, the Caliph Umar in Jerusalem. He sieged Jerusalem. They didn't attack and slaughter everyone in there. He sieged Jerusalem, and in one of the greatest acts to repudiate the Roman Christian expulsion of Jews from Jerusalem, invited the Jews back to Jerusalem. We're run 10 minutes or 10 seconds. So you have the verses, you have the history. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mubin. Robert, mic's all yours for your opening statement.
Yes, thank you, Mubin, for your kind and gracious opening statement. Just a few of the numerous inaccuracies, distortions, and outright falsehoods in it are among them the first thing about the context. Let's go to the context. Let's look at the context. According to Asawi ibn Juzai and many others, this verse, 929, and maybe I should actually start with quoting 929 just so that everyone knows what exactly we're talking about. Fight against those who believe not in Allah, nor in the last day, nor forbid that which has been forbidden by Allah and His Messenger, and those who acknowledge not the religion of truth, even among the people of the book, until they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued. Now, according to these Islamic authorities, and I invite you to give me others that contradict this, they say this ayat was revealed when the Messenger of Allah was commanded to fight the Byzantines. When it was sent down, the Messenger of Allah prepared for the expedition to Tabuk, which of course became the whole setting for the revelation of chapter 9 of the Qur'an, which was the last major chapter to be revealed with serious doctrinal content. Now, in 929, we find, in chapter 9 in general, we find, of course, the notorious verse of the sword, slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, and we find this verse about fighting even the people of the book, that is primarily Jews and Christians, until they submit as inferiors to the rule of the Muslims. Now, as far as the context goes, you were saying that there ought to be some recognition given about the language about peace treaties in the first part of the chapter. Now, it's very important to note that there is a peace treaty that's offered to the people of the book in that particular verse. If they pay the jizya with willing submission and feel themselves subdued, then there's peace with the Muslims. But that means that they submit to the dhimma, to the contract of protection, which was institutionalized discrimination against non-Muslims, against the Jews and Christians, forbidding them to build new houses of worship or repair old ones, to have authority over Muslims. They had to pay this special tax that the Muslims did not have to pay, and so on. Now, that, according to Islamic law, is justice. So when Qurtubi says that even their disbelief doesn't prevent our being just to them, there is nothing in Qurtubi, and I challenge you to quote it if it's there, but it isn't, that Qurtubi does not say, don't fight them, don't make them pay the jizya, don't make them submit. As a matter of fact, he says just the opposite. But as far as Qurtubi is concerned, that's justice. So being just to everyone means making the Jews and Christians submit as inferiors, that is to be subjugated, as according to the debate topic tonight, they are to be subjugated under the rule of Islamic law. Now, had the Byzantines attacked the Muslims? No, they had not. Muhammad moved, according to Islamic tradition, against the Byzantine garrison at Tabuk entirely unprovoked. And were the people there pagans? No, they were Christians. They were Christians of the Byzantine Empire. So when we look actually at the historical context of the passage, we find that it actually is calling for an attack that was completely unprovoked. So when you say that the attack was only when we only fight when we're attacked and we only fight against the pagans, that's actually not at all so in connection with this verse. Also, there are, Ibn Juzai says that this verse is a command to fight the people of the book, denying their belief in, because they deny that Allah is the true God and Muhammad is his messenger. And so the fight is because they do not believe. That is the reason for it. The subjugation then follows. The Tafsir al-Jalalain says that when chapter 9, verse 29 specifies that Muslims must fight against those who follow not the religion of truth, it means that Muslims must fight against those who do not follow Islam, which is firm and abrogates other religions. And Ibn Kathir says that this is because the non-Muslims were in bad faith and they have to be made to feel their bad faith. They have to be made to feel the sting of the punishment of Allah because of their rejection of Allah and Muhammad and Islam by being subjugated under these various laws. As-Sawi specifies that the payment of the jizya signifies that non-Muslims are humble and obedient to the judgments of Islam. As-Suyuti says that the jizya is not taken from someone in a state of hardship, although many times in many places it was. And sometimes the people of the book, when they had to pay this tax, were subject to various humiliations, were slapped, were spat upon, and so on, because they had to feel themselves subdued in accord with the command of the Qur'an. Ibn Kathir says that the dhimmis must be disgraced, humiliated, and belittled. Therefore, Muslims are not allowed to honor the people of the dhimma or elevate them above Muslims, for they are miserable, disgraced, and humiliated. Now, there are many, many other Qur'an commentators and Islamic scholars who say this kind of thing. You predicted that I would quote them, and I will go on quoting them. But the problem is that the fact that there are others who might say otherwise does not mitigate the fact that Muslims are actually acting upon these verses all around the world today. It's obvious. Now, you say, well, you're just endorsing the extremist view. No, I'm reporting on the fact that what you call the extremist view is frighteningly mainstream, and that Christians are being persecuted in Nigeria, in Egypt, in Pakistan, in Iraq, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, and elsewhere because of Muslims understanding this passage and chapter 9 in general, and the Quran in general, and Muhammad saying, I have been commanded to fight until against people until they acknowledge that there is no God but Allah and that I am His messenger. Muslims are acting upon these understandings. So it's all very well to say that, well, there are alternative views, but what would really be the response of someone who actually endorsed the alternative views and did not agree with the idea that non-Muslims ought to be waged war against and subjugated as inferiors, humiliated and disgraced under the rule of Islamic law, and denied basic rights? It would seem that it would be far more important to be talking to the Muslims who believe these things and trying to convince them that their understanding of Islam is wrong, rather than your opening statement was full of attacks on me as if I originated these things. Well, you know as well as I do, Muslims aren't listening to me. Muslims are listening to the authorities that I quoted and many others like them. And the unfortunate fact is that nowhere in the Islamic world is there a mosque or an Islamic school or any Muslim organization in the United States or Canada or Europe that has any kind of program to teach that the understanding of Islam held by Al-Qaeda and held by these people that you call extremists and blame me for reporting on their activities, nowhere is there a program showing that that understanding of Islam is wrong. And yet young Muslims are falling prey to it left and right, and falling prey to it all over the world. This is a scandal and a horror of unimaginable proportions. And the difficulty that you have is that you're going against an understanding of Islam that is very mainstream. I'm out of time?
You are out of
Okay,
time. I have
thanks.
to turn the mic back over. Mubin, it is all yours now for your first rebuttal. Go right ahead.
Mubin?
Are you still with us?
Oh, sorry about that. I was on mute. My bad.
Oh, that's okay. The mic is now all yours for your first rebuttal.
Okay, here we go. So thank you very much, Robert. And I did not mean to say that you are to blame for these perspectives. They do exist. There are a number of points that I wanted to touch on. You quoted Ibn Jawzi. First of all, it's pronounced Jawzi, Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawzi. I mean, like I said, if you quote me one scholar giving that interpretation, that doesn't mean anything. What that tells me is this guy understood it in the way that you're saying. And that's fine. I am very well aware that you have these scholars who are writing, 1,000 plus years ago. They're going to write according to the conditions and the understandings they have at that time. So you quoted Ibn Jawzi saying one thing. I mean, I started off quoting Al-Qurtubi saying the exact same thing. You asked, where do you find somebody saying this? And I quoted specifically, this proves that the disbelief of non-Muslims must not prevent us from being unjust to them. Okay, so that's one thing. And you talked about dhimmi discrimination. I'll get to that because the issue of dhimmi is a larger issue. I just wanted to stick to the verses, really. Muslims are acting according to those understandings you were saying. Now, I mean, you're right. Those Muslims who act according to those understandings are who? Are terrorists, Al-Qaeda type especially. And this is why we have Muslims who are refuting this and saying, no, this is not the correct Islam. And I cannot believe that you just made that statement There is no organization that has a program in which these views are being denounced or showing people that these views are. I cannot believe you made that statement, because there are many, many organizations in not only the US, not only the UK, but in Canada. In fact, you can actually do a quick Google search. If you were to do Toronto Mosque Detox, it'll show up an article. It'll bring up an article that my father is involved with the mosque that he runs in directly combating these false interpretations. So the idea that there are no organizations doing these programs, I'm going to say that you just haven't looked hard enough, and that if any have shown themselves to at least suggest that they're doing so, you will shut them down. In fact, I saw on the Twitter feed my Jihad. We had Muslims who were coming on there to say that, listen, terrorism is not my Jihad. We're trying to differentiate between, ethics of war, just war, because, we're not pacifists, to differentiate between just war and terrorism. We say this terrorism, extremism is one thing, but what happened is some of your followers, or whatever they are, your fans, they hijacked the hashtag. So it shows you that even if Muslims are trying to do so, there are elements that will try to shut us down and then say, look, the Muslims aren't saying anything. So this is completely false. Returning to Muslims, or sorry, is mainstream. You're saying this view has become mainstream. Listen, I have a hat behind me. It says NYPD. I got that hat from Mitch Silber, the former head of the NYPD Intelligence Analysis Unit. And after all their spying, casting a wide net, how many plots did they uncover? Zero. So when you say that it's mainstream, I expect to see a lot more cases of extremism, violent extremism, using these verses as justification. But in fact, you don't find that. The same thing with the FBI, and there are a number of differences of opinion. Some say, look, there are all these plots. Others say, look, well, there are all these plots, but the large reason why these plots came to the knowledge of the FBI is because of Muslims themselves. So to try to separate Muslim involvement from counterterrorism is a very dangerous thing, I would say, because it alienates and isolates everyone else, the larger Muslim community. If you want to convince them to help you, it doesn't help to castigate all of them. So when you say this is a mainstream view that Muslims have, this is again completely false. This is proven false by the intelligence community itself. So that's another point. So 2 points which I'm really surprised that you made. One was this mainstream statement, and the other is that there is no organization that has a program denouncing violent extremism. I'm running on 4.5. I think I have 6 minutes. Just on dhimmi discrimination, you talk about. Yeah, just on dhimmi discrimination, it is true that if you look at hundreds of years ago, the conditions, we would see them as discriminatory. They are certainly not at the level, or human rights, even human rights development, only began to arrive at the place it has arrived. I mean, I can look in Canada itself, in
And
the US.
Mubin, I'm sorry to cut you off.
Okay.
The rebuttal is actually 5 minutes, but we'll come back
Okay,
to
no
you
problem.
for second rebuttal.
Okey-dokey.
Mike's all yours.
Okay. Actually, you said that you had produced a scholar who said something different. Actually, you didn't. And you did not address my point. I pointed out that Qurtubi only said that Muslims should give justice to the non-Muslims. But I pointed out that the concept of justice in Islamic law encompasses the Sharia understanding that the dhimmis are to be subjugated in accord with the Qur'an. And so for Qurtubi to say that we have to be just means we have to enforce Islamic law. There is nothing in Qurtubi, and I challenge you again to produce it and quote it, that says that that Muslims should not fight against and subjugate non-Muslims. As a matter of fact, he says just the opposite. And as far as the organizations that are fighting against this understanding of jihad, it's really it's comical to me that you would name the My Jihad campaign, which is run by a Hamas-linked Muslim Brotherhood front group, the Council on American Islamic Relations, that has resisted every counterterror effort that has ever been proposed or implemented anywhere in the United States, and has undertaken a large-scale effort to get Muslims not to cooperate with the FBI. You mentioned Twitter. Go on. I don't know if you follow Zahra Bilou of CARE San Francisco, but she's routinely tweeting out that Muslims should not talk to police, not talk to law enforcement. Why? What have you got to hide? I tell you, if there were terrorist activity going on in my church, I would invite the police in and help them find the terrorists. And so all this closing of ranks, it's very suspicious. And to name this group that is sponsoring the My Jihad campaign as some evidence, it's risible. The My Jihad campaign is a cynical and deceptive whitewash designed to fool people into complacency about the jihad threat and make them think, oh, well, jihad is just getting in your exercise or making friends. And in reality, there are armed jihadis fighting jihad warfare against non-Muslims all around the world today. The fact that somebody in Chicago or San Francisco thinks that jihad means getting exercise doesn't do anything to challenge those jihadis. It only is directed toward non-Muslims. If CARE really wants to fight against the understanding of jihad that Muslims all too often hold that involves violence and subjugation, then let them run their ads in Cairo or Riyadh or Baghdad or Kabul. But in Chicago and San Francisco, come on. And in any case, it is unfortunately a mainstream idea. The fact that nothing was found in New York at a particular time and place establishes nothing. New York is the greatest city on earth indeed, but it is not the whole earth. And there are armed jihadis in every continent, and they are waging violent jihad against non-Muslims in the places I enumerated before: Nigeria, Egypt, Pakistan, Indonesia, and elsewhere. And so it is, unfortunately, quite mainstream. You said, well, these are 1,000-year-old authorities. I have authorities, I don't know if I have time, but I will quote from all the schools of Sunni Muslim jurisprudence, the Maliki, Hanafi, Hanbali, and Shafi'i, and they all say these things. And you could say, well, these are old authorities. Okay, find me new ones where those schools of jurisprudence teach something other than this. Ibn Khaldun, who was a Maliki jurist, he said, in the Muslim community, the holy war is a religious duty because of the universalism of the Muslim mission and the obligation to convert everybody to Islam either by persuasion or by force. Ibn Taymiyyah was a Hanbali jurist, and he said, since lawful warfare is essentially jihad, and since its aim is that the religion is God's entirely and God's word is uppermost, therefore, according to all Muslims, those who stand in the way of this aim must be fought, and so on and so on. But there was one other point that you made before we go on, and I can quote more and will. But you said that the dhimmi was also something, the dhimma is something of the past. It's not. The Egyptian Copts just recently were threatened with the reimposition of the dhimma and the reimposition of this institutionalized system of discrimination, subjugation, and harassment. And they took that very seriously, such that an Egyptian Coptic leader responded to the Salafis who were saying this in Egypt by saying, we will resist to the point of martyrdom. In Gaza, Hamas spokesmen have said that as soon as they consolidate their power fully over the entirety of the Palestinian territories, they too will reimpose the jizya and the dhimmi system. And it is something that other Islamic authorities have spoken about elsewhere in the world, not 500 years ago, not 1,000 years ago, but today. And so it is something that is a very live system, and it is based on their understanding that the Qur'an teaches warfare against and subjugation of non-Muslims.
Thank you, Robert. And at this time, we have to take our first break of the evening. Again, our lines are open. Please give us a call at the studio at 248-416-1300. When we return, we will get right back into our rebuttals, our crossfire, and then our closing statements, and then open up the lines for you, the audience, to call in and ask your toughest questions to both Robert and Mubin. We'll be right back. Stay with us. You're watching Debate Night Live on ABN.
Hello, this is Sam Shamoun from the Jesus or Muhammad Show, one half of the team with David Wood. I'm here exhorting my brothers and sisters in the Lord Jesus Christ who've been blessed by the programs at ABN, especially by the Jesus or Muhammad Show, to consider and prayerfully consider to partner with us financially, because as you know, ABN is a viewer-supported satellite station. In order for us to continue to broadcast the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, not just to Christians, but also to Muslims, and not just to Muslims, but to those who are sitting on the fence and are considering embracing a worldview or seeking after God, ABN wants to reach these people, but can only do so with your financial support. So I'm encouraging my brothers and sisters to come alongside ABN and make a financial contribution to continue Jesus and Muhammad and other shows with the purpose of preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ, seeing Christians get strengthened in their faith, Muslims coming to saving faith in Jesus, and others turning to Christ as their only hope and Savior. But again, we cannot do this if the support does not come in to continue to broadcast these shows. So would you please consider prayerfully asking God whether He'd have you support us on a regular basis so that we continue these programs and continue to bless the people of God, preach the truth of the gospel to the non-Christians, including Muslims, so that in everything we say and do, that Jesus Christ will be glorified and that His gospel will spread throughout the entire world. Would you please join us financially? Thank you so much.
Welcome back to ABN Live on Debate Night. Our topic this evening is the Qur'an teaches warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers. Arguing in the affirmative, we have Robert Spencer, and arguing in the negative, we have Mubin Sheikh. Thank you again for joining us both on the show, and we will get right into our second rebuttal. Mubin, the mic's all yours, and you have 5 minutes whenever you're ready.
Ready, go. Okay, so we need to come back to the verses on jihad. One thing that is not disagreed upon, or there's no difference of opinion, is the first verse that was revealed regarding jihad, and that's chapter 22, verse 39. And it says, to those against whom war is made, permission is given to fight, because they are wronged. And verily Allah is most powerful for their aid. They are those who have been expelled from their homes in defiance of right, for no cause except that they say our Lord is Allah. And again, we're talking about the context of pagans and otherwise hostile forces to the early nascent Muslim community. And it's talking about those people who were fighting you, evicting you from your homes. And I'll quote another verse, chapter 60, verse 8. 60, verse 8. Allah forbids you not with regard to those who fight you not for your faith, nor drive you out from your homes, from dealing kindly and justly with them. For Allah loves those who are just. And Allah only forbids you with regard to those who fight you for your faith and drive you out of your homes and support others in driving you out. So you see, this is the context in which all these verses regarding fight them appears. Because I have shown in my quote of chapter 9, if they do not fight you, then don't fight them. So you see, the verses from the Quran alone remove completely the foundation upon which Robert's argument is based. It is this wholesale, this is what Muslims believe, this is the Quranic ayah, here it is, you have to believe my interpretation of it. And what I have shown is even in the verses, in the earlier verses in chapter 9, because in 929 is the first place where the term people of the book is mentioned. This is true. But if you look at the rest of the context, when it's talking about fighting, those who do not believe in Allah and the last day, I mean, at least Muslims believe that Jews accept belief in the one God. So when it's talking about those who do not believe in Allah, it's talking about the pagans. And we learned from the earlier verses in chapter 9 that those are pagans who were actively engaged in hostilities against Muslims. Okay, and then he started to quote some of the other scholars, try to say that there is reason where you're supposed to fight them, and you will find that, of course. This is a war tradition in Islam, and it is no different than the war tradition of other great civilizations. In fact, and currently in our own civilization, I mean, it's hard to say we don't preach war, considering the U.S., and I'm very pro-U.S., God bless the U.S., but I mean, the U.S. has been involved in some kind of war since World War II, right? So it's hard to say, well, we don't do it, but yet we're engaged in active hostilities in Muslim lands, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not using that as an argument against Robert's position. I'm just illustrating. Speaking of my jihad, he tried to do the guilt by example. He says this is a Hamas-linked group that's really bad, and if you click on their link, your computer will blow up. I don't know. I have nothing to do with CARE. I couldn't care less about CARE. Um, this is an attempt by Muslims to denounce terrorism and violent extremism. And there are many people trying to do this, but you see, we run into this problem of people then hijacking the hashtag. I don't want to make this about CARE or my jihad. I'm just saying that there are people who are condemning, but they're being turned down. We're at 3.5 minutes. As I mentioned in my first exchange or first opening, I talked about the history. Like, look at Umar, the Caliph Umar in Jerusalem. Again, this idea that Muslims are supposed to be at war and subjugate all people, non-Muslims that is. How do you explain that Umar, Caliph Umar, sieged Jerusalem, did not destroy it, did not take over with violence and brutality, invited the Jews back to Jerusalem after the Christians had exiled them, refused to pray in the Christian churches lest people made the claim that, look, Umar made the claim upon this church. If it was about war and subjugation, how could that even happen? So again, I'm on 4.5. I'm going to reiterate again. I read the verses from chapter 9, chapter 60, other verses, which directly refute the idea that you have to fight them because they're non-believers. Nay, you fight them when they are fighting you. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mubin.
Well,
Robert?
Here again, don't believe me. Let's go to the Islamic authorities. Al-Azhar University in Cairo is the foremost institution in Sunni Islam. It was praised right after 9/11 by the New York Times as a beacon of Islamic moderation. And I have here a legal manual, Umdat as-Salik, Reliance of the Traveler, which is certified by Al-Azhar. I have here, it says here, we certify that the above-mentioned translation, that is the one I've got here, corresponds to the Arabic original and conforms to the practice and faith of the Orthodox Sunni community. Conforms to the practice and faith of the Orthodox Sunni community. Now, Mubin, you've just been speaking a great deal about defensive jihad and claimed that there is no offensive jihad. Certainly there is defensive jihad. There is the command in 2239 and 68 in the Qur'an to fight against those who have attacked or supposedly attacked the Muslims. But there is also offensive jihad, as this manual certified by Al-Azhar as conforming to the practice and faith of the Orthodox Sunni community. It says that the Muslims have the responsibility to make war upon Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, provided they first invited them to enter Islam in faith and practice. And if they will not, then invited them to enter the social order of Islam by paying the non-Muslim poll tax, the jizya, which is while remaining in their ancestral religions, until they become Muslim, or else pay the non-Muslim poll tax. And then they quote 929 in support of this idea. And so we have Al-Azhar University certifying a manual of Islamic law from the Shafi'i school that tells Muslims to wage war against Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians until they convert to Islam or submit and pay this tax and submit to dhimitude. And it's solely on the basis of their being non-Muslim. There is nothing in here about doing this only if the non-Muslims attack you. This is pure offensive jihad. We also have Ibn Kathir on the celebrated verse of tolerance, there's no compulsion in religion. And Ibn Kathir says this, that there is no compulsion in religion, means do not force anyone to embrace Islam, because it is clear and its proofs and evidences are manifest. That sounds great. But then it goes on to say, this verse is abrogated by the verse of fighting. You should be called to fight against a people given to great warfare, then you shall fight them or they shall surrender. Allah also says, O Prophet, strive hard, jahada, against the disbelievers and the hypocrites, and be harsh against them. That's At-Tawbah chapter 9, verse 73. And fight the disbelievers who are close to you, let them find harshness in you. Ibn Kathir goes on to explain, all people of the world should be called to Islam. If any one of them refuses to do so, or refuses to pay the jizya, they should be fought till they are killed. Now, see that? It's all the people of the world are called to Islam, and if they refuse to become Muslim, they are fought till they pay the jizya or they are killed. Nothing about defending yourself against them. This is pure offensive warfare. Now, as far as making an analogy between this and the wars that the United States has fought, I was never a supporter of the ridiculous and self-defeating adventures in Iraq and Afghanistan, but the reality is that the United States has not been fighting aggressive wars of conquest, contrary to leftist hysteria. There is no American colony in the Middle East that is placed there with the U.S. flag and about to become the 51st state. There is absolutely no connection, no analogy between that and this aggressive war of conquest that Islam mandates in the Qur'an and that many, many Muslim authorities are saying ought to be fought. Maududi, Maulana Maududi, the Pakistani jihad theorist and politician of the 20th century, he said the purpose for which the Muslims are required to fight is to put an end to the rule of the unbelievers so that the latter are unable to rule over people. The authority to rule should only be vested in those who follow the true faith, that is, Islam. And so, in other words, the non-Muslims have no right to rule. He actually said this in another place. Non-Muslims have absolutely no right to seize the reins of power in any part of God's earth, nor to direct the collective affairs of human beings. And if they do, Muslims have the obligation to fight them. So, in other words, the Muslims must always seek to rule over the non-Muslims, to subjugate them. To say here again that CARE is fighting against this and denouncing it is completely false. They're just changing the subject. They're saying that jihad is really just romping through the daisies or playing skip rope with your daughter. But they are not saying anything about the jihad violence that is being fought in the name of Islam all over the world. They're not even addressing that. And so it's all very well that Zahra Balloo might think that jihad is making cookies, but that doesn't stop the violent jihadis. And that is the great problem before us.
Thank you, Robert. Mubin, I will turn it over to you for a 3-minute crossfire whenever you're ready.
Sure. Okay, fire. Romping through the daisies. I like that one. Just quickly with my jihad and CARE, again, I have no ties to them. I really couldn't care less about them. I'm sure they don't have very high views of me anyway. But what I do appreciate is the attempt to differentiate between jihad and terrorism. And this is something that is necessary and is being done. Now, what you did is, you see, you again quoted some scholars, and Umdatus Salik is a work of the Shafi'i school. Now, I know many Shafis, and they study Umdatus Salik. In fact, under Nuhamim Keller, who probably that's the English version that you have, these people are Sufis. They certainly don't understand the verse as you have suggested. They will record what scholars have said on such and such verses, and you will find a multiplicity of scholarly opinion on these verses, like I showed you earlier. And you're right, I wasn't quoting Qurtubi, I was quoting Tabari, in fact, or actually I was quoting Qurtubi when I said Qurtubi regarding do not let the hatred between you and others cause you to be unjust in your dealings. Qurtubi says this verse also proves that the disbelief of non-Muslims must not prevent us from being just to them. Now you're suggesting that, well, just in this case refers to jizya and dhimma, and this is not stated here in this verse. In fact, if you look at as it goes on, it is not permissible for us to retaliate in the same manner, even if they kill our women and children and cause sorrow to befall us. So he's talking about the concept of fighting in war. That's what he's talking about, being just. Do not transgress the bounds of fighting. I'm not going to talk about offensive wars, and it's funny about no U.S. colonies. While it's true that no U.S. flag directly flies over their embassies, I mean, this is what grand strategy is all about, right? I'm very much into Western influence into the Muslim world, the good things that the Western society has, but to say that this kind of expeditionary enterprise does not exist is not true. What we see today in our context today is lesser than it was 1,000 some odd years ago. You will see these things of slaves and dhimmis. You can't build a church. You can't build a church too high. You will find these things. But we're talking about today and now, and people today and now, especially those who study Umdatus Salik, they don't then say, aha, now we must go and declare jihad and force jizya out of the Christians and Jews. They don't do this. And those people who are out fighting, they don't quote Umdatu Salik and others, they quote, they base their aggression on grievances, not necessarily Quranic verses, you see. This is a very important thing to understand. It's not always about citing verses and doing it because of that. They fight you because they perceive you are fighting them.
Thank you, Mubin. Your time's actually just about up. We'll turn it back over to Robert for a 3-minute crossfire.
Okay, you actually said that you quoted scholars saying the contrary. You still haven't. Not even one. You keep quoting this one line about how we should do justice, which just means implement Sharia. If you can find me some place where he directly contradicts these Sharia provisions, which present themselves as justice, then I'll accept your point. But you still haven't done it. As far as the forbidding the building of churches, it's bitterly ironic what you're saying in light of the fact that the building of churches is indeed impeded, and violently so, today, now. In Egypt, Christians try to build a church and Muslim mob shows up and burns it down. That happened like last week, you know, and it's happened more than once in recent months. And even in Turkey, which is supposed to be so westernized and secular, or at least it used to be, it's extraordinarily difficult for Christians to get a permit to build a church because of the lingering influence of the Sharia provision that non-Muslims are forbidden to build new houses of worship. And of course, all the jihadis quote grievances. That's because defensive jihad is the order of the day until the caliphate is restored, because only the caliph is authorized to wage offensive jihad. But what I'm arguing tonight, what I'm showing from the Islamic sources, from an abundance of Islamic sources, is that offensive jihad is an element of Islamic theology, and this is why they want to restore the caliphate, so that offensive jihad can then be waged again. But until then, they have to retail all these grievances to justify their jihads, because all jihad technically is defensive today, but this is not a matter of theological reform. It's just a matter of the condition of the Islamic world and the fact that there is no caliph today. And so the problem with what you're saying is that you haven't backed any of it up. That whether it was Qurtubi or Tabari who said that we have to do justice. Justice in Islam, and I would ask you to contradict this if you dare, is equated with Sharia. And you quote this, you say, well, they're Sufis, and Sufis understand this differently. Well, let's go to the leading Sufi, one of the greatest Muslims who ever lived, Al-Ghazali, the founding figure, the towering figure of Sufism. He said this: one must go on jihad at least once a year. One may use a catapult against the non-Muslims when they're in a fortress, even if among them are women and children. One may set fire to them or drown them. So that contradicts what you were saying about the women and children. If a person of the Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the book, is enslaved, his marriage is immediately revoked. One may cut down their trees. One may destroy their useless books. Jihadists may take his booty, whatever they decide. Now this is Al-Ghazali, the leading Sufi in Islamic history. And Sufis were at the forefront of the jihad in Chechnya for centuries. And so you say that, well, Sufis, they reject this book from Al-Azhar, fine. Then they can quote Al-Ghazali and go on jihad as well. And the problem is they have.
And your time is up, Robert. Turn it right back over to Mubin. Mubin, you have 6 minutes for your closing statement. 6 minutes
Okay.
for...
Okay. Okay, let me read the verse again for you, or the commentary from Al-Qurtubi. He says, the verse proves that the disbeliefs of non-Muslims must not prevent us from being just. Now, you make the argument that just equals implementing provisions of Sharia. You see, this is not stated anywhere. This is your interpretation. And if I continue reading his section, he directly talks about retaliating in war. So the context of that statement is not deal justly with them, meaning impose jizya on them. This is not stated by Qurtubi here. So you are forcing this interpretation on. Secondly, you talk about Christian churches, etc., in Egypt, etc., and there's a lot of political instability in these countries. I would argue against whether or not you want to blame religion because of this or politics, but I will reference a very recent, the Moroccan king upgraded a synagogue, several hundred-year-old synagogue in Morocco using state funds. So this idea that, again, this is how it is across the board, this is not true. You're quoting these scholars, okay? And what I have tried to do is I will acknowledge that you're going to find many scholars who have these things to say. Al-Ghazali is writing literally almost 1,000 years ago when he's talking about catapulting people, catapulting into fortified cities. This is because of the way that people lived back then. They lived in fortified cities. Women and children, people all lived within the greater courtyard of the walls of the citadel or whatever it was. So again, look at it in its context. You're again back to the verses. This is, I think, very important to remove the foundation of your argument. Your argument, which is that the Quran teaches, that's what I heard, the Quran teaches, and you didn't quote anything from the Quran. You've only quoted that one verse, which is your go-to verse, 929. You haven't quoted any other verses from the Quran. You said Ibn Jawzi said, and then I said, well, Al-Qurtubi said, and then you said, well, Umdatus Salik writes, and then I said, well, At-Tabari says. You see, it becomes a he said, she said, because I've read not just the one verse. At-Tabari also talks about this. Ibn Kathir says, do not let your hatred for people cause you to be unjust. He says, be just, that is closer to piety. So, if one says one thing and another one says another thing, all that proves is that there's a difference of opinion over those verses. What there is not a difference of opinion of is the content of the Quran itself. That's why I came to the verses, specifically chapter 9. So I think that we can, I don't like to use the phrase kill two birds with one stone. I don't believe in killing birds with stones. Not one, let alone two, but showing the verses from 1 to 4 to 6 to 7, showing that there are mitigating factors. The fact, and I hope you don't deny this, because we can read the verses again if you need. The fact that there are mitigating factors, specifically if they fight you, if you're in a peace treaty with them, don't fight them. That proves that the Quran cannot teach war and subjugation against people just because they're non-believers. I gave historical examples. The Christians of Najran that came to the Prophet, peace be upon him, the Prophet invited them into the mosque to pray. If it was about war and subjugation, how could he have even extended this to them? And if we go later on, after the Prophet had passed on, again, Umar in Jerusalem, I bring this up a second time, you did not even touch it, because you realize that if it was about war and subjugation, Umar would have bombarded the city, laid waste to everyone, and sold whoever was left over, or taken into captivity who was not left over. But in fact, he did none of those things. So it's fine what you think Ibn Jawzi said and what Umdatus Salik says, but I go with what the Quran says, primarily because it's what the Quran teaches. I went with what the Quran said. I went with the actual historical example by the Caliph, who I am pretty sure understands the Quran and its message better than Ibn Jawzi, Al-Shafi'i, and writings like Umdatus Salik. So again, the verses themselves show mitigating factors, and the fact that there are mitigating factors proves unequivocally, I would say, that Islam does not call for war and subjugation just because they don't believe. Read the verses again if you have to. Chapter 9, verse 1 onwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mubin. Robert, closing
Thank you.
statement.
Yeah, a funny thing, Mubin. You were saying without any support at all, it's just your bare assertion that Qurtubi has a different understanding of justice from what is the content of Islamic law. And I thought, well, that's really remarkable that a pious Muslim would depart from Islamic law and not equate it with justice. And so I just happened to be looking at this book that is certified by Al-Azhar that we've been talking about, Umdatus Salik, and it's actually the chapter in which the instructions about jihad warfare against unbelievers and their subjugation as dhimmis is called justice. And so obviously Al-Azhar thinks that justice means warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers. They don't have any problem with it. I hope you will take up this error with them and show them the error of their ways. You're wrong that I only quoted 929. I actually also quoted 9.5, 973, and 9.123. And let's go to some more. I have here 839. Fight them until there is no more fitna, that is disbelief, polytheism, unrest, whatever. And the religion is all for Allah. Now that is the context of the peace treaty. When the religion is all for Allah, when the non-Muslims have been either converted to Islam or subjugated, then of course you don't fight them. And that's what happens, what is being discussed at these verses you so love, the beginning of chapter 9. It's funny how you keep saying 9, 1 through 4, and 6 and 7. Because 5, of course, says, slay the unbelievers wherever you find them, unless they become Muslim, submit to the regular prayers, and pay the poll tax, pay the alms tax, and so on. And you mentioned the Christians of Najran and how generous Muhammad was to them. Where are they? Where are their descendants now? Is there a thriving Christian community in Najran today? Why, no, there isn't. Golly, what happened to those people? Do you think maybe they were waged war against and forcibly converted to Islam, or subjugated as dhimmis until the misery of dhimmitude made it such that they converted simply to have a chance to have a decent life? I think that is what happened to them. And what happened to them was that is what happened to them, and it was in accord with the teachings of the Qur'an and the teachings of Islamic law that flow from the Qur'an. Also, as far as Umar goes, Umar, when he went to Jerusalem, you're saying if he had meant to subjugate the non-Muslims there, then he wouldn't have been so nice. Well, actually, he wasn't. The reality is that according to Islamic tradition, the historical value of this is quite dubious. He is the originator of the Pact of Umar, which is the foundation of the system of dhimmitude, which denies basic rights to non-Muslims, denies them the right to build new houses of worship or to repair old ones, denies them the right to have authority over Muslims so they can't get a decent job and are relegated to the most menial jobs in society. They have to pay this tax, and so on. That's Umar. And then you say, I think Umar knows more about the Quran and Islam than As-Suyuti or Ibn Juzai or all these other authorities that I've been quoting. Well, how is it that they all get it wrong? Why is it that Islam is so frequently misunderstood by the people who are most dedicated to applying it? And that is the thing that I'm going to conclude with in this section tonight, that what's very strange about this that you're arguing is that so many Muslims don't get it. And what I don't understand is why it's so hard for Muslims to understand that Islam is really teaching peace and love and hugs and kisses and happiness. Why is it that if jihad is really romping through the daisies, that they somehow think it has to do with guns and warfare? How did these misunderstandings arise? I didn't make them up, as much as your friends and allies would like to claim that I have, and as the Organization of Islamic Cooperation has tried to claim that non-Muslims, Islamophobes, are criminally linking Islam with terrorism. It's Muslims who link Islam with terrorism. They're the ones who have done it. We are just reporting on it. And come on, you've got to admit that this linkage is based on copious quotations from the Quran and from scholars of Islam. And so this is not an endorsement of their view. I wish that you would prevail and convince all your fellow Muslims that Islam has nothing to do with warfare and subjugation. The problem that you face is that the textual evidence against you is very great. And instead of denying that and pretending that it isn't so, which only impugns your own credibility, your best chance is to turn to them and to tell them that it's not just to give an alternative view of jihad, that's not good enough, but to explain to them why their view of jihad is wrong and why they are misunderstanding and misinterpreting the Quran. But misunderstanders of Islam abound in the world, and they abound in the world precisely because this is what the Quran teaches, warfare against and the subjugation of unbelievers. The material you adduced about defensive jihad does not and has never been understood in Islamic theology to cancel or to abrogate the material enjoining offensive jihad. As a matter of fact, Ibn Ishaq, Muhammad's first biographer, Ibn Qayyim, and all the way up to the present day, the recent Chief Justice of Saudi Arabia, they all have said that there are 3 stages of jihad delineated in the Quran. The first is tolerance, the second is defensive jihad, and the third and final stage that is valid for all time is offensive jihad. That is the stage that the Salafis, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, and the rest of them are trying to reintroduce into the world by restoring the caliphate. And this is an understanding of Islam that is unfortunately all too mainstream. And so while I wish you well and I wish you success, if you are sincere in your claim that Islam does not teach this, it is not me you have to convince. It is the great majority of the jihadis in the world who understand quite otherwise.
Well, the formal part of the debate is now over. Thank you, gentlemen. We will take a 60-second break, and when we return, we will open up our phone lines for you to call in, 248-416-1300. Again, also feel free to visit abnsat.com, where this debate will be uploaded. Again, abnsat.com. We'll be back in 60 seconds. Stay tuned.
You are watching ABN.
Hi, this is David Wood from Jesus or Muhammad. As I'm sure you've heard, ABN has some significant financial needs. A lot of the equipment here is either outdated or damaged, and it's affecting the broadcast. I'll say ABN does a great job with what they have, but they could be doing much more if they had some newer equipment, some newer cameras. And so I encourage everyone to support the work that's going on here. We'd like to have more broadcasts, more shows, more programs, and we can only do that through financial donations. And so I encourage everyone out there to contribute whatever you can. And beyond all of this, apart from the technical needs, there's also the security needs given the increase in threats. And so if ABN is going to continue carrying on this work, they're going to need your support as they always have. And so as as we end out the year and you're thinking about where you'd like to donate, I don't think you'll find a better place than ABN.
Welcome back to Debate Night Live on ABN. At this time, we will open up the calls for the viewers to call in, share your comments, and ask your questions to both of our debaters. Our first caller with us right now, we have Osama. Welcome to the show, Osama. What's your question for us?
Well, actually, I have a few statements I would like to share with you guys quickly. Number one, our dear Muslim friend here, he needs a lot of help because he learned Arabic in a couple of years. He needs another 20 years to know Islam before he talk about Islam. When you talk about this contradiction among Muslim scholars, Robert Spencer is quoting you one and you quoting another verse, two different interpretations to two different verses in the Quran. I can give you the same contradiction in one verse of the Quran, chapter 47 and verse 35. You know what Allah said? Do not be weak and do not call for peace when you have the upper hand. So Muslims do not have upper hand like yourself, can betray the American and act like a nice guy to America and can work for FBI. But the time will come, when the right time will come, when Muslim in America have the upper hand. You yourself, who are helping the FBI today to have victory over the terrorists, you yourself will be a terrorist. Muslims call for peace when they do not have the upper hand. So I can show you many verses in the Quran where you see different interpretations of verses. When Muslims have upper hand, they're not loving and peaceful. When Muslims do not have the upper hand, they're loving and peaceful. And literally, you talk about Omar and Jerusalem, as you were there and you saw what Omar did to the Christian and to the Jews of Jerusalem. You have no clue. Read the Pact of Omar to know what Omar did to my home country, Egypt. What Omar did to the Christian and the Jew of Jerusalem. Yes, indeed. He actually built them homes with a lot of garden around to make sure they come back. That's really, you guys are just full of hogwash Islam. Now,
Osama, before you go on to your next point, let's give both speakers an opportunity
to Summer. I have a question for my friend here. Just a quick one. I'm not going to go any far away.
Right ahead.
I want him to tell me, what does this statement say in English? I'm going to give him a word in Arabic, and I want him to read to me what it says in English. قال أبو عبيدة كل آية فيها فرق للقتال فهي مكية منسوخة بالقتال. Because he's been quoting Al-Qurtubi, and I'm glad he believes in Al-Qurtubi. Here's what Al-Qurtubi said about Abu Ubaidah. كل آية فيها فرق للقتال فهي مكية منسوخة بالقتال. Now, can he tell me exactly what this Arabic said? And if not, I would like to translate it to him right now. Go ahead, sister.
Okay. Thank you, Osama. Mubin, the mic's all yours.
Yeah, Osama, calm down a bit. He's talking about different interpretations, and all this shows is that there is a difference of opinion. I mean, if you have not studied Islam, maybe you won't know this, but there is a lot of difference of opinion in Islam. There are 4 schools of law, and when Robert is talking about Umdatus Salik, Umdatus Salik says this. Therefore, Al Azhar is endorsing the war and subjugation of believers. Umdatus Salik is one of many works by the Shafi'i school of law, and it is done in English. And so Al Azhar said, yes, this is a faithful translation. So I don't see how it's an endorsement of Al Azhar policy. Just on the topic of different interpretations, when you're gonna give me talking about Abu Ubaidah and people who are writing from the times in which war is ongoing, you will find them speaking in a way in which it's clear war is their context. And this is the entire argument. When people are fighting them, they will refer to the other, they will quote their scriptures in a way that validates their particular context. So to show me that Abu Ubaidah is talking about jihad and how every verse has a portion associated to jihad, this is not really making the argument, because what you need to show is that, your average everyday Muslim is, secretly planning. I love this. You're working for the FBI, and one day you're going to turn on them and become a terrorist. If you look for a boogeyman everywhere, you're going to see him everywhere. Thanks.
Robert, any comments?
Yeah, Mubin, there you go again with this reductionism of my argument. What I said was plain. This video will be available. People will be able to watch it and check what you're saying. So it's probably not a good idea to so brazenly misrepresent what I say just a few minutes after I say it. You said in the first place that I only quoted this Shafi'i manual from Al-Azhar. Actually, I quoted Maliki and Hanbali authorities as well. I have Hanafi authorities here also. You say that it's just one interpretation of many, and yet you still have not adduced a single quotation, not even one, to show that that Muslims should not wage war against and subjugate unbelievers. Just to say they should work for justice is not enough, because it is common in Islam to equate justice with Islamic law, which mandates this warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers.
Where is this association?
Excuse me, I never interrupted you. Excuse me.
My apologies.
You say that that this Umdat as-Salik is one of many Shafi'i books. Fine. Produce another. Give us a quote. Show us even one that says Muslims must not wage war against and subjugate unbelievers. Could we just have even one?
Can I give it?
Let's actually move on, because we have a lot of calls coming in. If we have some time at the end, I'll give you both an opportunity to re-comment. But right now we have Adrian, I believe, on air with us. Welcome to the program.
Hello, good evening. My question or comment is for Mubin, and the way I understood your main point is that the majority of the Muslims believe understand the Qur'an as being a message of love and not war, and that's contrary to the over 20,000 deadly terrorist attacks that have been done all over the world since 9/11, and a lot of your arguments stemmed from the point of view that because one scholar doesn't agree or a couple of scholars don't agree on this side, therefore we can't make any generalized kind of statements. Well, this kind of reasoning reminds me of like the medieval arguments of how many angels can sit on the head of the pin. But if we look at the actual physical effects of what Islam and of what the Qur'an has brought about in the present-day world, all the persecutions of the Christians in Egypt, in Somalia, in Malaysia, in many countries where Islam is the main religion, where are the Muslim organizations condemning this? Where are the Muslim organizations trying to say no? The Quran is incorrect, and I understand that you really can't do that, because when you're squirming right and left, trying to justify it and trying to change the topic, you can't criticize the Quran, because you ultimately believe that it's the infallible word of Allah. The Christians Christian religion underwent a reformation. Islam has never undergone a reformation. It has never undergone an honest look at itself at these verses that are there without trying to, weasel out of what's really stated there. Because if it does, it'll cease to be Islam.
Okay, thank you, sir, for your comment. Mubin, mic's all yours.
Yeah.
If we can keep the responses brief because the calls are coming in.
Yep, got it. First of all, I don't justify anything. I condemn unequivocally persecution and oppression of Christians. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that the dhimmi who is persecuted, he will find that I am the prosecutor on the day of judgment. So I don't justify any of that oppression. Secondly, I want to make a quick point. You say in the modern world, and this is true, where was the Islamic extremism, terrorism in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s? That was secular Marxist terrorism. So we have something very specific now in this age in which the Islamic supremacist movement has come about. And I'm going to say to you that if Islam was about war and subjugation, well, there would have been war and subjugation going on all throughout history, but that's not the case. There's something very specific about this time, and I'm going to say to you that it has very little to do with religion, more so to do with political grievances. That is why you see these things happening in the world, in the Muslim world.
Thank you. Robert?
Little to say. I just can say that we haven't seen it throughout history. We didn't see it in the 50s and 60s of the 20th century because the Islamic world wasn't strong enough to prosecute the jihad at that time. Islamic law dictates that one must not wage jihad warfare when there's no chance of winning and when the enemy has more than twice your strength. When the West was strong and confident, jihad was in abeyance. Now, when the West is practically suicidally self-critical and not weak militarily, but weak culturally, weak societally, that's now we see the jihad stepping up.
Thank you, Robert. Next call, we have Joseph on air with us. Welcome, Joseph.
Yes, please. Welcome. I just have very quick 3 points. First point, we find the 2 verses in Qur'an with the interpretation of all Muslim scholars. The verse 9:29 and the 9:5 about fighting against the non-believer, infidel, and the Christian. All Muslim scholars without one exception. They explain it as it is. The fighting against, trying to subjugate non-believer and take the jizya. Three options for the Christian and Jew. Jizya, one of the options. But for the infidel, Islam or death. This is all Muslim scholars. Baydawi, Jalalain, Tabari, Zamakhshari, all of them. Second, Muhammad himself, when he tried to attract tribe to follow him, the Rod Anaf, Suhaili, part 2, he told them, if you follow me, God will give you their land. We're going to attack other tribes. You will be given their land and their woman. It is very obvious. This subject already very obvious. And throughout the history, Islam started with Syria, invaded part of China, India, Persia, North Africa, Egypt. It is very well known. You guys talking about something like ABC. It is black and white.
Thank you, Joseph. Let's turn the mic over to Mubin to save time and get his comments.
Sure, I'll try to be quick. Robert, you talked about the Muslims will wage jihad when they're strong, and you acknowledged that there was no jihad back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s because the Muslims weren't strong enough, but now they're stronger. Then that makes no sense because, the Muslim world has generally been weak for a long time. That's the whole reason why you had Marxist secular governments popping up in the Muslim world. So to say that, we're weaker now, culturally weaker, but not physically weaker, makes no sense. The invasion argument is also weak. I noticed this with the anti-Islamic narrative, and that is, the Muslims were doing this. Well, I'm saying that I take a step back and I look at the way everybody was behaving. The Romans were doing this, the Persians were doing this. This is how people did war in those days. So to say that, look at the Muslims doing war in those days, well, that doesn't make a good argument. So that's what I got to say on that. I'll keep it going.
This is how people did war in those days, But it is only the Islamic community that is doing war that way now. And that's the problem. And really, otherwise, just go on because I know we have a lot more callers. I'll deal with the rest later.
Okay, and we can come back if we have a few minutes towards the end for you both. But right now we have Kevin on air with us. Welcome to the show, Kevin.
Hello, how you doing?
Good. What's your question for us?
This is a question to the Sheikh. I'm sure you understand the necessity for, I think it's called nask or abrogation. You mentioned a Surah 68 about being tolerant towards non-Muslims. But if you read the tafsir of Al-Jalalain, it says, God does not forbid you in regard to those who did not wage war against you from among the disbelievers on account of religion and did not expel you from your home, that you should treat them kindly and deal with them justly. And it says this was revealed before the command to struggle against them. Assuredly, God loves the just. So I believe 68 was abrogated, and the Qur'an is not in order of revelation. I believe Surah 9 is the second from last revealed. So I'm not sure how you would reconcile that in your argument. Also, if the goal is in Islam, according to Sahih Muslim 59:17, Muhammad pressed Ali on to fight them, and Ali asked in a loud voice, he said, why am I fighting these people? And the Prophet said, fight them until they bear testimony to the fact that there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. So I was wondering if you could respond to that.
Thank you, sir. Go right ahead, Mubin.
Yeah, I would have to look at Jalalain's tafsir again to see where he says that this is abrogated, and that's fine. I mean, there's a long discussion on abrogation, nasikh wa mansukh, in the Islamic sources. I'm not going to get into that. Some people say, well, you know, they're making these arguments to try to make sense of the verses. That's beyond the purpose of our debate here. Directly to your question, how do you deal with that? I have the Quran in front of me. I deal with the context, the whole context of the Quran. So when I see multiple verses, nobody makes the argument that all the verses regarding peaceful conduct, your peace treaties, dealing justly with people with whom you've made peace treaties, nobody says those verses are abrogated. So the general idea that you deal justly with those who deal justly with you still remains. And the other part of the argument is you deal harshly with those who deal harshly with you. So I'm not going to make the argument that Islam is a pacifist religion. There is definitely a component of offensive, aggressive action. This is normal. This is normal in all the great war traditions, if you will. So just on that, on the abrogation point, and I think you mentioned 59:17, Sahih Muslim. You're going to find many verses, many statements, one saying to Ali, and I have another one you can say, I'll give you one. I can quote one from Ali that said, look, don't fight the Abyssinians. Don't fight the Turks. So you can see that belief alone is not sufficient for waging jihad.
Oh, sure. There's the whole idea of the takfir and declaring Muslims to be hypocrites or unbelievers and thus fighting against them as well. Certainly, jihad is not restricted to warfare against unbelievers. It's also warfare against Muslims who believe differently. Dealing justly and peace treaties, here again, you're going back to the same thing without ever having established that justice in Islam is not Islamic law, which is warfare, which mandates warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers, and that the peace treaty in regard to the non-Muslims is the dhimma, the pact of protection, which mandates their denial of basic rights. And so we come back again. The Quran teaches warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers. Dealing justly is in 839. Fight against them until there's no more fitna and the religion is all for Allah. That is not abrogated. That is not canceled. That is not mitigated by verses that say deal justly with people or have peace treaties with them. This is the one that 839 that is understood in mainstream Islamic theology. All the schools of Sunni jurisprudence teach that this is the verse that takes precedence, that verses like it take precedence over ones according to the principle of abrogation as established by Quran chapter 2 verse 106, that is the final stage of jihad, to wage war against and subjugate the unbelievers. And as one of the earlier callers said, the Muslims, when they are weak, are tolerant. I wanted to save this for the end, but I've got to say it, I think, if there's time, that, you said that to say that we're culturally weaker now than we were in the 50s makes no sense. If only that were true. But the whole idea that resisting jihad and resisting Islamic supremacism is some kind of racism or bigotry or hatred, which is what I'm routinely charged with, is an indication that we no longer have the will to fight against this, but we are up against a very martial and determined foe.
Why don't we take our next call of the evening? We have Omar on air with us. Welcome to the show, Omar.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you. What's your question for us?
I have a question for you guests that I want to know if you can tell me how do you justify the killing of innocent Palestinians in Palestine and the killing of innocent Afghani in Afghanistan? And in another comment, if you can please invite a scholar from Islam, which is Dr. Zakir Naik or Yusuf Hastas to your program, then he will answer for all that you guests or any other people that have a question about Islam. They can answer you very well. Thank you.
I'd be very happy to debate Dr. Zakir Naik. Most Islamic supremacist spokesmen run from debate with me because obviously they know what I'm saying is true and they fear being exposed. I commend Mubin Sheikh for having the courage to debate me tonight, and I'd be happy to debate Zakir Naik if it could be arranged. As far as killing innocent Palestinians and Afghans, I've never justified such a thing, and such a thing could never be justified. And I hope that you are directing your ire against Hamas in Gaza, which is putting innocent Palestinians in harm's way by deliberately launching jihad attacks against Israelis from civilian areas, placing rocket launchers in school playgrounds and in residential areas so that they will draw retaliatory fire that they can use for propaganda purposes. That is a heinous crime, and I hope that you denounce it.
Mubin, any comments on your end?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I know what he was saying, but I don't support Zakir Naik. I don't like Robert said. Of course, there's no justification for killing innocent people, whether in the name of politics or freedom or religion or whatever it is. Right? Right.
Thank you. We'll take our next call. We have Joseph on air with us. Welcome to the show, Joseph.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I will talk with Sheikh. Sheikh, verse number 5 from Surah Tawbah. وإذا انسلخ الأشهر الحرم وقاتلها. I will read it in Arabic because I have 4 things I'll tell you. I read in Arabic, you know what I say. This verse, all the Imam of Muslims said, this verse did cancel all the verses who talk about love and peace. 124 verses counsel in this verse. Number 2, verse number 29, Surah Tawbah, قاتلوا الذين آمنوا. Why you are liar? قاتلوا, if you translate it in Arabic, it means kill. If you say it fight, that means تعاركوا, تشاجروا. Don't be liar. Number 3, verse number 60, Surah Al-Anfal. وَأَعِدُّوا لَهُمْ مَا اسْتَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ وَمِن رِبَاطِ الْخَيْلِ. Muhammad said to Muslims, take weapons and horses for fight. Verse number 65 from Surah Al-Anfal. يا أيها النبي حرض المؤمنين على القتال. Hey Prophet, teach your mu'mineen to fight, to kill. And I will tell you about Umar, that he is a good guy. Why Shia did not put it the name of Umar? Because he killed daughter of Muhammad, Fatima Zahra, and he was pregnant with Muhsin. Now, and you can read Ash-Shurut al-Umariyah in Jerusalem that they do it. And
Thank you, sir. Let's give, because we're running out of time.
Yeah.
Let's give Mubin an opportunity.
Calm it down a bit there, sir. Okay, he's talking about verses in which the Muslims are encouraged to fight. And you will find them because there are many instances where the Muslims were being fought against. And so whoever was fighting them, they were to be fought in reciprocation. That's the whole theme. Those verses that you see, Robert's been trying to kind of run around and say, oh, the verse on justice says it's about imposing Sharia on it, and just one verse. I mean, there are many, many places where if you look at an index and look up justice, you'll find many, many verses, and they do not, maybe one or two you can relate it to the immediate context, but there are so many others that give a general reference to being just in your dealings with other people, in your covenants, and this is exactly what people did. So
I
that's all
really
I'm going to
can't
say about
believe
those
that you were
verses.
trying to separate justice from Sharia as a believing Muslim. I find that amazing, and I hope that
Okay,
some of your
Robert,
co-religionists don't get wind of what you're
Robert,
saying there,
Robert,
because
before
they
you
might
encourage,
they might take umbrage.
Why don't we take our final call of the evening, and then I'll give you both an opportunity to provide any final comments that you have. Right now we have Curtis on air with us. Welcome to the show, Curtis.
Hi, it's actually Chris.
Oh, Chris. Welcome, Chris.
And I was actually invited by Mubin on Twitter earlier today to come get some. And then we started talking about a RAV4. But basically, I want to ask a couple questions here. I'm reading a great book, and it's not one of yours, Robert. It's actually by Alan Dershowitz, even though, Robert, you have many great books. It's called The Case for Israel. And I've learned many things reading this book, such as, Palestinians weren't even considered Muslim by other Muslim countries until Israel became a nation. Like, in fact, in the 1800s, the Jews actually outnumbered the Muslims in that country.
So we're actually running out of time. Did you have a particular question that you can ask to both of our speakers this evening?
Yes. Basically, I want to bring up the Armenian genocide because Mubin challenged Robert to come up with other times where Muslims were slaughtering people. And then Sahih Bukhari, 04:52-176, the day of resurrection will not arrive until the Muslims make war against the Jews, blah, 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 blah. Basically, the very holy book, the Qur'an, and its teachings are very racist. And how can he say Islam is peace if their very teachings and their leaders say we must kill all the Jews?
Okay. Thank you, Chris. Mubin, I will hand the mic to you. Just take about 60 seconds to answer this, and then just provide the audience any final comments that you have.
The day shall not arrive until there's a fight with the Jews and Christians. I interpret that, me and many others, that this refers to an end-time prophecy. Personally, I believe we're living in those days where Judaism, Christianity, and Islam will become the three major players that determine the future of the world, really. And it will be, this is the gnashing of the teeth, the brother against brother. So I'll just make the statement on that. And just to close, if I may, look, again, Robert keeps trying to make the argument that I haven't said this and I haven't said that. I've quoted many verses, and he will only come back to that particular verse and its use of just. But I don't just look at that verse regarding just, being just. There are dozens of places, literally, in the Quran where the term for justice is used. So the general idea of justice, meaning being fair to other people one-on-one or as groups, still remains. What you're trying to do, Robert, is force a very particular understanding onto that verse and to say, anytime the word just is used, that's what it should mean. And that is not the case. If any of you actually go and read the verses, not just the ones that are quoted, but the ones before and after, so you can get a context, you will see that whenever there's mention of fighting and conflict, it is almost always in relation to those people who are fighting you. Second point, just on the aggressive jihad or the expansive jihad. Again, this is a normal concept in human civilization. We ourselves in the West, we have an aggressive Western construct. This is why there are aircraft carriers waiting outside of countries. It is a show of force. It is a show of force. So this is something that all nations do. I mean, I'm sure the U.S. would like to rule the world, and for all intents and purposes, it does. But the idea that Muslims can't do that, or if Muslims did that at some point, that's proof of them being really, really bad and out to subjugate everyone. This is again proven false by the simple fact that in many places, Jews, Robert said earlier on that the dhimmis were given low jobs and they weren't allowed to make a decent living for themselves. Robert, this is very easily verifiable. The historians have talked about many Jewish personages who had high status jobs. Salah ad-Din, the great general against the evil
We're going to have to turn the
crusaders.
mic back over to Robert for some final comments. You have about 60 seconds, and we have to end the show.
Yeah, Mubin, there was a Jew who was named Vizier of Granada in 1066, and the Muslims were so enraged the Jew was holding authority over them that they carried out a pogrom and killed 4,000 Jews because they knew that this was against Islamic law. As far as, once again, you're just not being honest about what I've said. And people will be able to watch the videotape. I've actually quoted 839, 95, 929, 973, and 9123, and refuted your interpretations of 22, 39, and 68. And there are plenty of other Quran verses that we could bring to bear had we more time. And also, as far as you're going back and acting like these things are matters of history, in Pakistan, the colloquial term for Christians is street sweepers because they only hold the most menial jobs in the society because of the restrictions of dimitude. The idea that the Quran teaches warfare against and subjugation of unbelievers is unfortunately all too common in Islam. And I challenge you to do something about it instead of demonizing those who are. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you, Mubin, for joining us on the program. Thank you, Robert, and thank you to our audience for tuning in to another live episode of Debate Night. Again, feel free to give us a call at the studio if you have any questions or comments at 248-416-1300. This program will be uplinked on abnset.com and also jihadwatch.org. For more information, just give us a call at the studio. Until next time, we hope you have a great night.